Show me love on Light 87. This is the LiteCafe with Sam. I'll keep you company all the way till 10 o'clock, and we have a very, very special guest. We're really excited to have her here in the studio. It's Dr. Asha de Vos. Very good morning.
Good morning.
Dr. Asha has the best profile. I'm going to read it out, right?
Okay.
So she is Sri Lanka's very first marine biologist, and she's an ocean educator as well. She's a product, of course, of Ladies College, and her undergraduate was in marine and environmental biology at the University of St. Andrews. She went on to do her master's in integrated bioscience at the University of Oxford, and she's got a PhD from the University of Western Australia. And she's done such incredible work when it comes to protecting the oceans around Sri Lanka. She's someone who's come back here to really contribute and to make such a difference, and we're really happy that you're here to have a chat with us as well. So just to start things off, Dr. Asha, could you tell us why you decided to become a marine biologist?
So I think my desire, my love for just adventure is possibly one of the biggest things that took me down this path. So from a kid, I was, intrigued by, or I guess my desire was to see things no one else would see and go places no one else would ever go. Mm-hmm. And, it all started with National Geographic magazines, like seeing all those amazing people doing amazing things in incredible spaces, and you think, oh, wow, like that, I want that to be me. So it began like that. I fell in love with water in general. I was a swimmer in school, water polo player, so a lot of time in water. My parents exposed, me to really interesting people. So I used to go swimming at Otters, and Sir Arthur C. Clarke would come there. And, Sir Arthur C. Clarke, he moved to Sri Lanka to dive our wrecks. And so he would sit and tell me stories about these wrecks. And I always recite this one story where he just said, okay, there was this, I was diving and there was this skin that went past.
Okay.
So I was like, okay. And then he says, and he kept going. And I was like, right.
A skin? What is that?
Right. It was a skin.
Okay.
And then he says, it was brown. And I was like, okay, but what was it? And he goes, I don't know, because I had to come up from my dive. And to me, I think that almost that moment was the time when I thought, you know what? Like, I want to know what that was, right? And he could have been making it up, because there was obviously like a kid at the end, perched at the end of the seat, like desperate to know. And just sort of like, by the time I was 18, by the time it was time, for me to kind of take the next step in my education, I knew I wanted to do marine biology. So I basically applied to do marine biology, and so this is sort of where I've ended up.
Did you know that there weren't any other marine biologists in Sri Lanka?
So, okay, I'm going to have to make a correction there, because there are a few marine biologists,
okay.
But I'm the first Sri Lankan with a PhD in marine mammal research, so that's sort of my kind of little thing. There are a few marine biologists out there, definitely, and there have been a few before, but it's a tiny, tiny handful. Yeah. I mean, we're a country with 8 times more ocean area than land area. We're a beautiful tropical island. And yet when I told people at 18, I was like, I'm going to go do marine biology, people were like, so what are you going to do with that degree?
And you're a girl as well, right? So didn't that always come into play?
Of course. Like, everybody was like, oh, but then first of all, they had to get around the fact that I was going to do marine biology, except my parents. I always say my parents are my magic ingredient. Mm-hmm. They just said, do what you love and you'll do it well. And they have been so supportive. I mean, right this minute, they're actually half listening to my radio interview and half doing some work that I have left them to get done. Okay, so I wouldn't be able to accomplish anything I do without them. But of course, people had to get around the fact that I want to do this. People were convinced I wasn't going to come home, and I just kept saying, I'm going to carve my own niche. Mm-hmm. I'm going to come home because this is home and this is where I want to make a difference. I don't want to live in another country and contribute to whatever's going on there when I have this incredible space.
Yeah.
But then, of course, being female is always interesting, and of course, I love it. But for years, I couldn't even get a foot in through the door in sort of government institutions because I was too young and too female. I'd sit at meetings and they'd look at me and be like, oh, okay. And then they'd turn around. Yeah, and then they'd turn around and have their own little chat, even though they didn't necessarily have that background that I had, and I was doing because I wanted to make a difference, And you
spent years studying that subject.
Exactly. So, it took a fair bit of time. I think the whole story behind this is really about persistence. Mm-hmm. And, it took about a decade for the government to be like, oh, we really need to have a chat with you. Can you please come in? Ministers picking up the phone and actually calling me to come in. But, at the end of the day, I wouldn't want it any other way, and I always want to be too young and too female.
There you go. When we come back, we have to talk about something that's been a subject of study for her, someone just as a group of mammals, shall we say, just as unorthodox as her. So when we come back, it's lots more conversations with Dr. Asha. If you have questions, drop us a text on 0772 665566. The time is 7:42.
The time check was...
We have been talking to Dr. Asha de Vos, who is a marine biologist and someone who's really taken the time to come back to Sri Lanka after a very impressive education to really take care of the oceans. And someone that she has been studying has been what she terms as the unorthodox whales of Sri Lanka. And she's a very unorthodox person. So, Dr. Asha, tell us about why these whales are considered unorthodox.
Okay, so first of all, this is a population of blue whales that I work with off the south coast of Sri Lanka.
Your colleagues.
And yes, so they're my best friends. No offense to my friends who are listening out there, gosh. So the thing is that, these whales are incredibly unique, right? So for me, the thing that intrigued me, that told me that there was something special going on was actually a pile of whale poop, right? Oh. This is my eureka moment was a pile of whale poop, right? And I mean, this is really important because I was working off the south coast back in 2003 on a research vessel that actually was going around the world, but it stopped in sort of Sri Lanka, and I managed to get on. And we saw these blue whales, and I'm of course abridging this story, but we saw this aggregation of blue whales, which we weren't expecting. But when we saw them, typically blue whales will migrate to cold waters to feed, and then they come to warm waters to breed, right? Okay. But if any of you have, even put your feet in the water here off our coastline, it's pretty warm, right? I mean, the other day I was diving on the East Coast just last weekend, and the water was 30 degrees Celsius, right? So it's really warm water. So typically warm water like that is not productive. It doesn't have enough nutrients. So that's not where you get big, large swaths of food. And so that's why these animals normally will go to cold waters, because they need that. They're gigantic animals. They need to feed those big bodies. But here I found this pile of whale poop, and that whale poop basically was a clue to tell me that they were feeding somewhere close by. Because if you see poo, animals are feeding close by. Because of course, digestion.
This wasn't the breeding time.
No, this was. I mean, we don't really know when they're breeding, but we know that just seeing poo means that they're feeding somewhere close, and it's warm and tropical. And so that moment I realized they were a special population, because somehow they figured out how to feed in these warm waters that every other textbook had told me was not possible. So that's the first thing. And what we found is that they're the only non-migratory population of blue whales in the world. So they don't ever go to cold waters.
In the world?
They hang out, yes, exactly. They hang around in warm waters. So they don't only hang around Sri Lanka. They go to, say, Oman and down to the Maldives. But it's a very, very tiny range for an animal that big, right? They have a different acoustic dialects. So they speak a different dialect to blue whales in other ocean basins. So there are other blue whales in other parts of the world. But if I took this blue whale from here and I dropped it, say, off the coast of California where there are blue whales, they wouldn't be able to communicate because it's different dialects, which I think is super cool. And they have different adaptations. So here, we all get excited because people who've gone whale watching, and I'm sure there's a whole lot of you out there, you'll see the whale will lift its tail up, and then before it dives, and you see the beautiful tail fluke. And that's actually a really unusual sight. So we see it 60-70% of the time out here, so regularly. But anywhere else in the world, it happens 10-15% of the time, right? So you really don't see that tail fluke. And for years I was trying to figure out, I thought to myself, okay, obviously they're trying to get, deeper. Maybe they have to streamline their bodies and become more like torpedoes and just kind of go deeper, because maybe that's where their food is. And actually I just finished a scientific study that shows that actually they're feeding on something different to all blue whales everywhere else. Everywhere in the world, blue whales feed on krill. Ours feed on shrimp. And if you don't know the difference, that's not even a big deal, but it's the implications of that. Basically, krill will eat phytoplankton, which are these tiny microscopic plants, but shrimp actually eat the krill. So, it sort of adds another layer to this whole food web type thing.
Makes them more unique, I suppose.
Yeah, and then they're feeding on this thing, which means, and this particular species they feed on is deeper in the ocean column, which that's why these guys are lifting the tail flukes and having to go deeper. So they have unique behaviors also as a result of, they've just adapted, they're in this environment that's not typically where you'd expect them to be. But, over time, they've figured out how they survive in these waters based on what's available and where it's available. And I think that's super, super cool.
And speaking of like how unique the Sri Lankan waters are, could you, we, a couple of years back, I think, we had the dubious honor of being one of the greatest pollutants of the oceans as well. So what can be done to change that? What can be done by just general land people like us to change the pollutants that go into the ocean where unique mammals like the blue whale that you spoke about live in?
Right. So I'm going to, that's an excellent question. And here's the deal, right? Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about how blue whales feed, because that'll give you a bit more sense of how big an impact these plastics can be. Blue whales don't have teeth in their mouths. They're called baleen whales. They have these long comb-like structures in their mouth that they use to filter feed the oceans, and then they swallow what's in there. So all they do is they open their mouths, they take a big gulp of the water, and then they push out all the water, and then they swallow what's left. So if there's plastic in the water amongst their food, there's a chance that they're going to swallow them. There are cases of large whales like this dying because of plastics that we're putting in the water, right? So, that's something to think about. So in terms of plastics, I think it's a simple problem to solve. We just have to stop using the single-use plastics so much. Plastics are convenient. That's kind of the problem. But, you don't have to buy water bottles, right? I mean, you can carry a bottle with you every day, just refill it and use it. Why do you have to buy a new plastic water bottle all the time? Or silly bags? You don't need them. Take your own bag to the shop.
Asha, on that note, I have to ask you, we'll continue this conversation just after this, because we'll head off for our news in just a little bit. But leaving you with Kool and the gang, we'll come back and have a conversation with Dr. Asha on the oceans of Sri Lanka.
You want to let someone know that you really appreciate them.
The Backstreet Boys on Light 87, giving you great music to start off our third hour with you. The time is 8:13 on the clock. We've got a very sweet message from one of our regular listeners who said, "Hi Sam, good morning to you. Great morning show, and thanks for bringing great personalities such as Dr. Asha. So proud to hear from her and wish her all the very best and all the success for her future." We were talking to Dr. Asha de Vos, who is a marine biologist and an ocean educator. She has an impressive resume, a product of Ladies College. She has a PhD from the University of Western Australia, a master's from in integrated biosciences from the University of Oxford, and she's someone who's come back to Sri Lanka to focus on the oceans. And she was just talking to us about how the pollution that is in and around the Sri Lankan oceans has really affected the marine life as well. Dr. Asha, you were talking to us about, so just explain to us how our everyday pollutants have really affected the marine life that is so beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing, like I was saying, is plastics, right? And here's an interesting fact that you may not think about. Okay, I'm sure many of you have been down to the beach side, at least cast your eyes out at the ocean, thought, wow, this is really beautiful. I'm sure there's at least a portion of you that have seen plastics kind of floating around or on the beach, and one big wave, exactly, one big wave and it's in the water. But those are the big pieces of plastic that we see. And in fact, there are these things called microplastics, which are things that are basically from 1 millimeter to 5 millimeters
This is
long.
what you find in the face wash and the toothpaste, right?
So you have two types. You have the ones that are produced at that size, and then you have things that are bigger that just get broken down because of the sun and the waves and stuff like that, and they break down to these tiny pieces. They're so small that we can't actually see them with our naked eye. And because of them, scientists have found that 88% of our ocean surface is covered with plastics. So we may see the occasional big piece, which is actually horrible and disturbing to see. But if there's that much plastic in the ocean, just think about every other process, right? So they're finding that there's fish that have pieces of microplastic in their bodies. Where does that fish go? We consume it. Fine, we don't consume the stomach, so you can remove the stomach, maybe all the microplastics will go. That's not true, because plastics have chemicals that just go into the sort of the muscle tissue and stuff of the fish, and when you eat the fish, then you ingest those chemicals.
It's part of the food chain.
Absolutely. They're finding microplastics in plastic water bottles that you go and buy because it's convenient. They found that when you buy water from the shop, that there's half as much let me start again. There's half as much microplastics in tap water than there is in the water that you're going to buy from the shop. So if there's another reason to stop you from using single-use plastic water bottles from the store, this should be it. They're finding microplastics in salt. So everything that we eat is being contaminated by this new material that's sort of like a part of our generation. From the time we are born to the time we die, and we don't really fully know the effects, but there are definitely health implications to things like this. So if you don't really care about the oceans, being selfish, care about yourself, and think about the implications on your own health, right? And plastics are just one of the problems. There's a lot of other problems in the ocean.
Thank you so much. We'll be taking a short break, but when we come back, just to have a conversation about the kind of funding that is available for ocean research as well. The time right now, it's 8:17. We're in conversation with someone extremely interesting. That is Dr. Asha de Vos, who is a marine biologist and ocean educator. And she's someone who's really dedicated her life's work to keeping the ocean safe for not just the marine mammals, but for us humans as well. So we were talking about the funding opportunities that are available for ocean research and the kind of work that you do. Dr. Asha, could you break down to us the challenges that you have faced when it comes to getting funding for this kind of work?
Absolutely. So one thing is we don't really get any funding here in Sri Lanka, so no state funding. But I've been really lucky. I've sort of, I guess, over the years kind of built enough a reputation that I've managed to get a lot of good funds from other conservation agencies across the globe. But it's all competitive, right? So I'm always applying for grants. I spend a lot of time writing grant proposals, which takes away from the time of doing the research or the education work that we're really dedicated to. Some of my big funders are National Geographic, for example. And it's great because it's good to know that they believe in what we do, because they also only fund really great science and really good quality of work. And that helps us to also, show the world that from here in this tiny little tropical island, we have the incredible capacity to attract funding from across the world and from very prestigious institutions. We also get funding from private donors. So across the world, there are people who have heard about the work, who are interested, and who just send us donations. And that's huge because, there's no label saying what it can be used for exactly. And that means we can, put it to different projects that might suddenly come up that we're really interested in exploring, or just to pay a little salary that, of people.
What about the corporate community in Sri Lanka? Have they lent any support to you?
Right. So we're at early stages, and that's a really super question, because that's sort of a part that we want to explore a little more. We've been approached by one company to look at sort of building a partnership. But of course, we're open to that because, I think there's, as long as the organization shares our sort of vision, then, there is a lot of opportunity. And, there's, my organization, Oceanswell, has a huge visibility globally. So it's a pretty cool brand, I would say, and we do really great work. And so if there are companies out there that are interested in sort of getting involved, I would love to hear from them. And I'm sure there's always space to figure out how we can get corporate sponsorship to do a lot of the fun stuff that we do, a lot of the important but fun stuff that we do.
How would they, if somebody's interested in being a part of your work, how can they get in touch with you?
So I'd say email. You can email at info@oceanswell.org. That's OCEANSWELL.org. Please do contact us, and we'd love to have a conversation.
Speaking about Oceanswell, that's a really cool project, and when I was reading about it, I was really touched by the fact that you really help out local students in terms of research studies and guiding them in mentorship as well. Could you explain to us the kind of work that Oceanswell does as well?
Absolutely. So I started my journey with the blue whales. I basically kick-started the first long-term research project on blue whales in the whole of the northern Indian Ocean exactly 10 years ago. So it's been 10 years. But for a long time, I was sort of spearheading everything, doing everything absolutely on my own. I didn't have an organization to fall back on, and I didn't have that kind of support. So, after 10 years, you suddenly realize, come on, I can't really continue like this. I moved back to Sri Lanka from kind of being partly away, partly here, running the project here, being at universities abroad. And so the time had come. So I established Oceanswell, and it does marine conservation research and education. And my thing is, so 70% of our coastlines are in the developing world. But when I go for meetings, big international meetings or conferences, I'm usually the only representative from this part of the world, right? That's 70% of the world being represented by one human being, which is absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
And then that other 30% are making decisions for all of us, which it can't work.
And I don't
right?
think this stat is something that a lot of people know about. Like, it's the first time I'm hearing about it. I'm sure for a lot of the listeners.
Exactly. And for too long, marine conservation has seemed like this field that's so far out there. That's only like if you come from the West that you can
like
do this stuff.
Field.
It's a posh field. But it's absurd. It's at everyone's doorstep, right? So we all need to be part of that solution, and that's the thing. So for me, it's about building local capacity, because when I die, if I haven't passed on everything I know, then everything ends, and that's a waste of my own life, right? So it's about creating sustainability. And so I talk about this actually at the global stage. I talk about the importance of local heroes for every coastline. I talk about the fact that there's this thing called parachute science, where you have Western researchers will come to our countries, do research and leave, but they don't do any training, there's no funding, and that's not sustainable, right? Because then if that problem crops up again, do we have to depend on someone from outside when we have talent? Our countries are filled with talent. I've met some incredibly talented students, and so we try to create opportunities. We try to create opportunities when we're out on the water doing research. We try to create opportunities for them to do internships with us. And Oceanswell is quite a new organization, but in the future, we will bring in scientists from abroad who will, on the basis that they will create little projects that our students can get involved in.
And that you can build an intellectual community right there.
Absolutely. And so keep watching our social media profiles, because we will be advertising any positions we have or opportunities, and we do want more and more people to get excited about the oceans and get involved.
We're heading off for the headlines. The time is 8:30. Bonjour, you're on Light 87, you're on 87.6 and 87.8, www.light87.com around the world. We are in conversation with Dr. Asha de Vos. We've been having such an interesting conversation. If you've just tuned in, she is a marine biologist and an ocean educator, and someone who's contributed a lot towards making the oceans a better place. And something that she was telling me about was there's a really interesting conversation that she facilitates called the Marine Conservation Conversation. From your own words, tell us all about it.
All right, so Marine Conservation Conversations is an informal gathering of people from all different backgrounds. And essentially what happens is we advertise on social media. So we've got the next one coming up on the 25th of May at 6 p.m. at the Hive, which is MAS Innovations building on 51 Foster Lane. We welcome everyone. And what we do is if you register as per the sort of instructions on our social media and stuff, we send out a scientific paper. Now don't be daunted, because anyone can participate. In fact, the group that comes, it's sort of a growing community. It's incredibly exciting for me. And we have people who are bankers, accountants. We have people who are students. We have young people like from 15 upwards. Sometimes we've had a 70-year-old, someone's father being brought in. We have designers. We have people from every single background joining in. So you are more than welcome to be there. And the whole intention is that I send out this paper, and we all learn a new topic every month, and we sit and we just break it down for each other. So we start off, the first question I always ask is, what new words did you learn? Because everyone needs to be on the same page. And this is not about, our education work is not just about creating scientists. It's about creating an ocean conscious public. We come from an island, and we can look after our resources if we know how, if we feel responsible, if we can understand what's going on out there. And I'm sure, if you came from one of our sessions, I'm sure you'll be as addicted as the rest of them. We sit on beanbags, we kind of lounge around. Everyone's voice and everyone's opinion is extremely important. So that's kind of the fundamental rule. Everyone has space to speak and ask questions. And that's what it's there. I facilitate, I sort of engage and give input, but I encourage everyone to speak to each other, because at the end of the day, it's about creating this peer community that's passionate about the oceans, but also has a good understanding of what's going on out there. And it's not just based on only on like, oh my goodness, something's happening, but what are the facts behind it? And you'll be surprised what you'll learn. We've discussed everything from silk fishing in Sri Lanka. We've talked about how we can detect changes in fish populations based on old menus. Super interesting conversation. And the next one is all about the extinction of the Stellar sea cow and the processes behind that. But it's a really interesting paper. So do get involved. You can email us at info A+MCC@oceanswell.org to register, and we'll send out the reading, and we look forward to seeing you.
We'll share the contact details on our social media as well. Dr. Asha, before we let you go, we wanted to know what would be your words of encouragement and inspiration for a young budding marine biologist who's listening to the show and being like, how do I get to where she is?
So the first thing you need to know is I'm just like you. I want you to realize that sometimes it's very hard to see. Like, you see a person and you'll see them, say, on TV, or hear them on the radio, or you see a picture of them standing on a stage that seems prestigious, and you think, I can never do that. And that's absolute rubbish. I am just like you. I walk around barefoot all the time. I love swimming. I love going to the beach. I love the things that you love. I love running around Colombo early morning. And I'm a very normal human being. So I want to break down that barrier and that sort of that false idea that people who do things that seem exciting and interesting are special people. There's nothing special about us. Also, you will come across challenges along the way, and I always say, never give up. Have a dream, hold on to it. It'll be out there in the distance, and as you kind of wander along the path towards achieving that dream, you will come up against challenges. But there's never a challenge that you can't walk over or climb over or walk around. Sorry, see, I can't even speak properly. There's no wall that's ever going to be too big, right? So definitely think about the fact that if you don't have those ups and you don't have those downs, you can't really appreciate life, and your story gets much more interesting when you have challenges. So just always keep at it and never give up. Persistence, passion, curiosity. Find what you love. It might take time. That's okay. Take the steps to get you there, and just don't give up. And life is an incredible place. We have the privilege of being alive. We have the privilege of exploring and living and contributing. Whatever you choose to do, it doesn't matter. Make sure you're giving back. Make sure you're giving back and taking care of this planet that has given us so much. Thank you.
Dr. Asha, thank you so much for being a part of the show. It was great having you on board, and for all the work that you've done as well, and especially for coming back, I think, to Sri Lanka and training new young minds who want to take care of the ocean. It's been a great conversation. I hope you'll keep in touch with us as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks for sharing your time with us. We're heading off for a break. If you want to contact her, could you let us know what your social media handles are as well?
Absolutely. So Twitter is oceanswell.org. Oh, sorry. All wrong. Twitter is Oceanswell.org. So is our Facebook and Instagram. Just follow along. We post everything we do up there. I have a website, www.oceanswell.org. And you can also email us at info@oceanswell.org. So please join this giant adventure. I can guarantee it's an absolutely fabulous one.
You're listening to Light 87. The time is 8:45.